Hello there, you awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me for Stay Free with Russell Brand today with Paul Saladino, MD. You are going to love this interview. I became a carnivore because of this man. He's written books about being a carnivore and he convinced me to go from vegan all the way to carnivore. It's brilliant. It's a fantastic conversation that covers the kind of holiness that comes to mind when you hear the intricate beauty of the way that the human body works, right down to the subcellular level, and what I would have to describe as a kind of demonic evil in institutionalized food production. This is a Maha podcast. This is a Make America Healthy Again podcast that covers concepts like nutrition and vaccines and wellness. If you're watching this anywhere other than Rumble Premium, get Rumble Premium. You get more content. It's an ad-free experience and you will just love it. More content from me, more from Crowder, more from Tim Cast and all of Rumble's best content creators. Okay, let's get into the Paul Saladino interview right now. Paul Saladino, thank you so much for joining me for Stay Free with Russell Brand.
It's good to see you again, my friend.
You look well. Now, last time we spoke, I was a vegan. I wasn't a Christian yet. Obviously, I've been through quite a lot publicly as well, and we can touch upon that if you want to. But I've got one thing I want to say is I just can't believe how radically eating meat has changed me constitutionally. But don't take my word for it.
I was going to say, that's amazing.
I didn't use that. That's the first time I've had abs in my whole life. What's going on? Tell me the science behind this.
Well, I'll tell you the science, and then I want to hear more about how you feel, because I remember seeing you in DC, and you told me in January of this year that you'd start eating meat again. And I thought that was so cool. So, I mean, you just think about it. Humans throughout our history have always treasured meat. You look at any group of hunter-gatherers on the planet now, and they treasure meat. It's at the top of their sort of hierarchy of foods they want to eat. And they eat animals from nose to tail. And so on the first podcast that we did, we talked a little bit about these nutrients in meat, but there are so many unique nutrients in animal foods, whether you're eating chicken or beef or fish or whatever, that just don't occur in plants. Plants are great, but a lot of nutrients don't occur in plants, or they don't occur in any appreciable quantities in plants. So when you are not eating meat as a vegan, which is, that's your right. You're a sovereign human. You can make an intentional choice. It's very, very hard to get these nutrients that are central to human thriving, right? And I listed them out last time, and I'll give you a sense of them again. Things like creatine, which gets a lot of press today, but other things like carnitine or anserine or taurine, all of these nutrients, they're critical. Did I lose you?
No. I'm really focused because in a sense what's fascinating is this is a time where people are reluctant to make essential or universal claims, i.e., well, at the chemical level, a man is a man, a woman is a woman. And I suppose, as we discussed previously, I was a vegetarian from the age of 14 because I love Morrissey and I love the Smiths, and someone showed me footage of abattoirs and the way that animals are treated, which I thought was appalling then and I think is appalling now. And I suppose there's been a spate of documentaries, even within the last 5 years, that sort of made the claim that you don't need meat. And in fact, meat is bad for you. And it's actually, your arteries and cholesterol. But what I can tell you empirically is, what I always felt when I was a vegan is I like the fucking, excuse my language, taste of meat. So I was always eating, I was a sucker for all that Beyond stuff, which I now kind of would regard as a sort of a globalist, imperialist consumer scam. I liked all that fake meat, even earlier versions like Linda McCartney, God rest her eternal soul. I was always chomping down on a Linda McCartney sausage, the late wife of the great Beatle Paul McCartney. They had a brand of vegetarian sausages. Then when I went from vegetarian to vegan, Paul, it's like, oh my word, I can't eat anything. I was making these bizarre concoctions to get some sort of paste that had meatiness to it. It's like I was trying to synthesize it the whole time. Now, I still have the kind of moral quandaries, but I suppose that's sort of separate from diet. And in a way, what is morally and ethically suggested is that you should be eating meat that is reared locally and killed respectfully. Even though death is always terrible and there's something brutal about, death. Life eats death. That's the price, man. And making those universal claims in this climate seems somehow to be challenging.
I mean, I heard I read this book when I was younger. It was called The Tracker. There's a guy who grew up on the East Coast in the Pine Barrens in New Jersey named Tom Brown. And he was apprenticed to this. It's a true story, I believe. He was apprenticed to this Apache Indian gentleman who sort of gave him Native American philosophy, ways of life, and hunting. And he told this Native American elder told Tom Brown something, that in order for something to live, something else must die. This is the way of life. And so this ethical quandary around eating meat, I think that we have it because we are removed from nature. If you and I were in a tribe in the jungle here in Costa Rica, or in the forest of, the northern United States where Native Americans were, wherever, we would not have an ethical qualm about eating meat. What we would do is we would hunt it respectfully. And because we hunted it, we would eat it from nose to tail. We would eat all of the organs. We would eat the bone marrow. We would use the hide and the hooves, and we would eat all of the animal. We would waste nothing. And we would be very grateful to this sort of cycle of life. All of these sort of indigenous tribes have some sort of cosmology. They all see themselves as a part of something bigger, right? We've lost that. You go to the grocery store, you have a disembodied steak, and we've lost, dare I say, the spirituality of eating meat. Perhaps it may sound overblown, but it's sacramental in some ways. And the nutrients in meat, like I said earlier, are so unique for humans that when you go from not eating meat to eating meat, you have a step function change in the way that you think, the way that your energy is, your libido, your vitality. And the other thing I would mention here is that I think that as much as humans have an ethical imperative to participate in that cycle of life and understand and respect the nutrients that these animals give us and to live accordingly, I think that as humans, and I think this is sort of a Christian perspective, like our purpose is also to do the most good in the world. And so how do you do the most good in the world? How are you the best conduit for the ideas that you believe need to go into the world? You need to nourish yourself, right? You need to nourish your brain and your body. And so I've always thought eating meat is part of supporting myself. I do a lot of things in my life. We don't know each other that well personally yet, but I'm very intentional about the way that I live my life across all aspects, because I sort of see so many aspects of my life as sacred, and I want to protect this vessel. I don't drink, I don't smoke. I think about these things. I try to get good sleep, I'm trying to be a good vessel for something bigger than me, for something in the world, and to put ideas into the world that help people. And so nutrition is a part of that. And I think you've seen that now. And so there is this other ethical side of it that, hey, if you are a more lit up human, if you are a more energetic, clear thinking human, you're doing good in the world. That's really, I think, a very high purpose for these animals in your life. They're nourishing you and you're putting it back into the world. And one day you will die and go back to the earth too.
These are excellent points. And I think your early remark that we are detached from nature is an important one, that we've been decoupled from a deep reality that we have to live in harmony with because of recent deep education into how systems of control operate. I know that whether it's the choice that was made to use blue light instead of red light behind these screens, or any number of nutritional choices, I know that what you talk about, kind of nutritional state of subjugation, is what's required by the systems that seek to emulate and counterfeit the divine power that you're describing. Is not an accident, but deliberate. It's deliberate that you eat food that makes you tired and bloated and ineffective. It's deliberate that you stare at screens that hypnotize you and dumb you down. That certain chemicals are to be found in the water sources. You can see that while looking at your bright face, that you're a person that's coursing with creatine and nutrition and collagen, and for all I know, methylene blue and tallow. Do you?
Not methylene blue, but the other ones, yes.
Tell me why no methylene blue, Paul.
Methylene blue is an interesting one. This gets a little technical. But I love what you're saying there. And I wonder about that. I think that it's a very sinister reality that we're living in if there are powers that be that are actually trying to subjugate us and make us dumber. It's very possible. And certainly with the devices, I think that the blue lights and the flickering of the devices is designed to addict us. As far as the food goes, yeah, we can talk about this too. I don't know. I think that nourished humans are likely to be free-thinking humans, and free-thinking humans are a little more difficult to control than tired and humans that are just fatigued. And that humans that are thinking clearly are going to question the system. So there's a very sinister potential reality there. As far as the methylene blue conversation goes, so methylene blue is a complex molecule that actually moves electrons down the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. So I don't want to get too technical here, but the way that we make energy as humans is we harvest electrons from the food that we eat. We pass those electrons through a transport chain in the inner mitochondrial membrane of every cell of our body except the red blood cells. And at the end of that mitochondrial electron transport chain, those electrons end up in water. And that electromotive force, so passing the electrons down the chain, creates a gradient of hydrogen, basically protons, hydrogen ions, and then moving down the concentration gradient creates ATP. So there's a little nanomotor inside your mitochondria, and the protons moving back down their concentration gradient creates ATP. It's a really exquisitely elegant system. But the movement of electrons between all of those complexes, and they're numbered, is how we create an electromotive force to move protons and to create a concentration gradient. Now, methylene blue will move the electron down the electron transport chain, which is a good thing if you have a blockage in your electron transport chain. But most of us don't. There are definitely some people with severe neurodegenerative diseases that have, I would say, severe mitochondrial issues. And in that case, methylene blue can be this adjunct, and it can move the electron around the blockage. But if you don't have a blockage in your electron transport chain, methylene blue is making less energy per electron. So you're actually getting less energy out of the food you eat, which is a bad thing. You want that electron transport chain to function optimally. So I think for most people, methylene blue is probably not something you want to be using at a mitochondrial level. The reason it gets a little tricky is because methylene blue also has effects on the neurotransmitters. It's a monoamine oxidase A inhibitor, and so it's going to affect serotonin levels in the brain. And so I think some people feel good with methylene blue. It doesn't mean that your energy production at the level of the mitochondria is better. And, remarkably, at high doses, methylene blue will turn your heart blue. This has been shown, and your brain. So it may not be benign.
I see it's done some wonderful things to my urine and my tongue. Yes. I do enjoy looking down and seeing sweet blue urine. I think that's pretty fascinating that something so fundamental can be adapted and altered. We can't give you any more of this content for nothing. Here's an advert, you filthy swines. Did you take a vaccine? Then you've got spike protein coursing through your veins right now. I don't know how you're going to get that stuff out of your system. In fact, I do. The Wellness Company have created the ultimate spike detox designed to help your body clear spike proteins, reduce inflammation, and support heart health. With natural ingredients like nattokinase, dandelion root, and bromelain, it's your daily proactive defense against a man-made virus. You know that a new study by Korean doctors claimed that COVID vaccines raise the risk of 6 cancers, including lung, breast, and prostate. Researchers analyzed health records from more than 8.4 million adults between 2021 and 2023, and their findings were published in Biomarker Research, a respected scientific journal. Check out that journal for yourself. There's a link in the description. If you're concerned about it, there's a way out. The ultimate spike detox from the Wellness Company. Don't wait until symptoms strike or something unexpected happens. Something unexpected. Experience the only formula approved and used by Dr. McCulloch, one of the top doctors who risked it all. Head to twc.health/brand and use the code brand to get 10% off plus free shipping. Go to twc.health/brand and use the code brand to get 10% off plus free shipping. Back to the content. I enjoyed very much your description of the elegance of the mitochondrial system and the complexity of electron manipulation and conveyance. And whenever I hear something articulated by someone who understands it, I feel the approximate awe of a heavenly creator. I think such complexity could not occur as a result of randomized events, even over billions of years. And elsewise, why would we regard large patterns with such wonder, whether in mathematics, which, by the way, why would it exist if there was no intelligence, and music and symmetry and art. The hallmark and presence of God is evident in all God's creation, and I am just in awe of the wonder of that, and thank you for explaining it so beautifully and clearly. Now, when you said that about the potential impact and like the methylene blue might make you feel better, but it might not necessarily be doing it in a way that's ultimately beneficial. It reminded me of once someone telling me that what caffeine is doing is kind of sort of stretching you and creating a sort of a stimulated state that you're going to pay a price for down the line. I mean, in the Buddhists say borrowing from your future self. Do you think it belongs in that kind of category? Is that what your concern is?
Yes, in some ways. And I mean, it would be, we can talk about caffeine. It's very, no one likes it when we talk about caffeine, Russell, because 90% of the world drinks coffee. What's that?
Because we're all addicted to it. I remember that famous study where they tried to study the efficacy of caffeine. But as I recall, the control group were able to drink caffeine, but the group that didn't have caffeine were not only not having caffeine, they were also in withdrawal. And that was the the study didn't account for the fact that everyone was in a doubly suboptimal state. And so, I mean, I don't want to depress people. I mean, I might as well tell you that this is caffeine in its purest and most wonderful form in that drink. Do you drink caffeine, Paul?
I do not. Wow. I have in the past. So when I was in my medical training, I used caffeine some, and I would get like heart palpitations, heart fluttering, and I stopped it many years ago. I went through bad withdrawals, but it's tricky. So there are a few things about caffeine. The first is to know that the half-life of caffeine is 5 to 6 hours. So the caffeine that you're drinking now, Russell, will not be even, it will perhaps be half metabolized by the time you go to sleep in 10 hours, depending when you go to sleep. I mean, it's probably 3 or 4 o'clock wherever you are. If you go to sleep in 8 hours at midnight, the caffeine you're drinking now is not even half metabolized. It's still in your system. And what caffeine does is it has multiple mechanisms, that it blocks the adenosine receptors in your brain. Adenosine is a compound that builds up in our brains throughout the day, and it causes some sense of fatigue. It's not a bad thing. It's just how our bodies are telling us you are awake. We have this wake-sleep cycling, and while we're sleeping, our brains are regenerating in some ways. We have this incredible network of lymphatic drainage in the brain called the lymphatic system that pulls waste products out of our brain. And so it's important that we know when we are sleepy. Caffeine is masking that, but your brain is still sleepy under the surface. And so if you're drinking caffeine at 8 in the morning, by the time you go to sleep, you may have a quarter of that caffeine in your system, which can still disrupt sleep architecture. Drinking caffeine at 3 or 4 in the afternoon is a little bit more of a dangerous proposition in terms of sleep architecture. So that's just the first thing to consider about caffeine. There was a recent study that I saw that talked about in sleep deprivation, which is this time when a lot of people use caffeine. If you don't give someone caffeine, there are changes in the gray matter in the brain, right? So you have white matter and gray matter in the brain. And there are certain regions of the brain where the gray matter sort of expands when you are sleep deprived. It's just probably the brain trying to heal itself and push back against the damage that sleep deprivation is doing to your brain. Caffeine blunts that. So the concern here is that if you're using caffeine to ameliorate your sensation of a sleep deprived state, you could be preventing your brain from doing the necessary healing that it's trying to do when you are sleep deprived, because caffeine is blunting the expansion of gray matter in certain parts of the brain when you are sleep deprived. So it's a very powerful substance for humans that I think has been used throughout history for good and bad. I mean, I think I'm no history buff, but I think a lot of amazing, beautiful art and things have happened throughout history because of caffeine and coffee. And so great, fantastic. And other compounds related to caffeine, methylxanthines that occur in chocolate and things like this. It can certainly put humans into ecstatic states or creative states, but we just need to be very honest with ourselves about what it might be doing to our brains long-term. If we use it for sleep deprivation, or if we're using it too close to sleep, it could be causing issues. The last thing I'll say is that the coffee that a lot of people drink caffeine in, not necessarily tea, but the coffee can be moldy, right? So you want to find a coffee that's mold-free, pesticide-free. You got to be careful with the vessel through which you're drinking the caffeine. And then I'm just a bundle of joy. When people hear me talk, they just say, oh, you ruin everything for me. There are certain tea bags that are made from plastic. So if you're using a caffeinated tea, please do not use a tea bag made from plastic, because those are known to release millions, or sometimes an order of magnitude greater than that, billions of microplastics into your water. So putting plastic into hot or boiling water is the worst thing we could do for microplastics. And so there are all sorts of considerations around caffeine that thanks for letting me share that.
But when we have this like level of individual diligence that you are blessedly offering us the opportunity to be that aware of, well, are you sure that do you want to eat this tea bag? I can imagine that if I spent, and I'm going to actually, I'm going to say if I spent an hour listening to you or a week listening to you, and I know there's far too much knowledge in you for you to get across in one podcast, but I suppose that really I've sort of changed my agenda in the course of just the first 20 minutes to, I'm going to need to maximally benefit from this time that I have with Paul. Because I remember you saying before, like, even if you only ate McDonald's meat, that's better than not eating meat at all. That's one of the things that kind of struck me about our last interaction. What I would say I'd like to learn now is, like, I do, like, say I've got a boy, my little boy, he's 2. He had like a heart condition. He's got a condition called DiGeorge. Like, say I eat sometimes, when I say sometimes, I mean last night, Tony's chocolate, right? I was eating it cold out of the fridge. Oh man, it's so delicious. Like, anyway, my little boy comes up to me, and my wife don't like him to have chocolate, but he knows what chocolate is now, and so the genie's out of the bottle. I'm letting him have, like, I'm giving him like bits of this Tony's chocolate, which I feel like is kind of branding itself as, this is good for you chocolate. If I knew everything that you know about chocolate, would I give my son with a heart condition, he had like surgery and everything, would I give him chocolate or not?
What time was it that you were giving him chocolate? Was it early in the day or late in the day?
It was like, oh gosh, I'm sorry to say that it was 8 p.m. Earliest.
Okay. Well, late in the day is tough for kids because, like I mentioned, chocolate does have these methylxanthines, which are the same compounds, similar compounds to caffeine. So it can affect his sleep, which is then going to affect your sleep if he's not sleeping well. Chocolate is an interesting thing. So chocolate's tricky. There definitely are studies suggesting that chocolate has compounds, flavonoids, that could be beneficial at a vascular health level, at the endothelium in your blood vessels, and it may have benefits long term. Most chocolate is packaged with processed sugar, which is a little tricky, right? We can pretty confidently say that a processed sugar, sucrose, is not a great thing for humans. I think the Tony's chocolate, all these chocolates have sucrose. If you really wanted to make chocolate the healthiest way you could get a 100% dark chocolate and combine it with something like honey. And I think there's a really interesting divergence between the outcomes in humans and the way that natural sugars like honey and fruit affect us versus a processed sugar like a sucrose or a table sugar. These are really different things. And so if you took a dark chocolate and you combine it with honey, I would argue that's better for humans than like a processed sugar containing chocolate. The other considerations with chocolate are that chocolate can be fairly high in heavy metals. It's not going to kill you. And we're talking about things like lead, mercury, and arsenic, and cadmium especially in chocolate. But if you eat a lot of chocolate, it's just meaning check your heavy metals, because the seeds of plants, and chocolate is made from plant cacao seeds that are roasted, the seeds of plants do tend to concentrate heavy metals. And again, I don't mean to be a killjoy. I'm equipping people as much as I can with the tools to make their own sovereign decisions in their life. Nothing is quite black and white. So if you're eating a chocolate, just check that it is tested for heavy metals and these kind of things also. And potentially be aware that the sucrose in there, the processed sugar in the chocolate, is not great, but there's an easy way to fix that, which is you take 100% dark chocolate and you combine it with honey. And I can speak about that if you'd like, but there are ways to make it better, and there are some considerations with chocolate as well.
What do you think, even though I know it's sort of like partly shtick, I am actually getting angry with you because you're one by one like removing so many of the sort of, you're demolishing the architecture of my comfort with your every announcement. But also, Paul, we do need to wake up. We need to wake up. I don't want to live in darkness. So like you were a significant factor. You and Bear Grylls were probably the most significant influences in me deciding to start eating meat, and it was kind of concomitant with my coming to Christ as well. So like, you know, I'm so quite actually interestingly, having listened to the earlier part of the conversation when you were talking about the sacraments and sanctity, with the idea of the flesh and the blood of Christ, that there is some kind of spiritual correlative to this incontrovertibly, not incontrovertibly, but somehow inextricably. I'd like to ask you this then. I'd like to ask you this. Like in general, say me, I am drinking a lot of caffeine. I'm drinking like sparkling water. I know there's probably microplastics in this. If at an individual level we're like being polluted, even if you're someone like me who's, you know, economically advantaged, albeit autodidactically educated, like what chance have we got? And I mean this in a Maha context, because I guess it was a DC event where we encountered each other briefly other than our interview there. Like what should be the role of Make America Healthy Again? What should be the role of government in facing up to big food, big agriculture, and, you know, I guess big pharma as well, of course, but like if we lived, like just you explaining to me as an individual, well, this is what you should feed your children, I'm immediately thinking, don't give your children anything other than organic whole food. And we've thankfully got a really good water filter in our house already for even the shower water and the drinking water. Probably there's got to be some supplementation. If that's what, you know, you can do that as an individual and we can do that as a family, and by God I will. But what does that tell us about our culture, where what's been normalized is junk food and food dyes and preservatives and pesticides in the food chain? Aren't we like ultimately poisoning and toxifying ourselves at beyond an industrial level, almost at a universal level?
Absolutely, we are. And it sounds hyperbolic when we say it, or it sounds inflammatory, but it's really, I think it's really true. I think evil. Yeah. I think I've begun to see it like this, Russell. I've begun to see it as like there are foods that are for humans and there are foods that are not for humans. And if you eat food for humans, which I would define as single ingredient foods, so meat and plants, right? Single ingredient foods, milk, eggs, fish, chicken, you know, Brussels sprouts, whatever, potatoes. These are single ingredient foods, or foods with labels that your great grandmother would recognize everything on the label. That's sort of just my working framework for food for humans. If you do that, and, you know, based on our previous part of the conversation, this is important to share with your audience. Like, I'm not trying to take away things from people or make it impossible. So the food for humans framework is quite broad, but I want people to understand this. I strongly believe, and this is something that I am so passionate about at this moment in my life and my career. And I think this is in line with the Maha movement. The Western medical system will not tell you this, but I believe that if you eat food for humans, you can correct or reverse the majority of chronic illness that we suffer from as humans today. And it's as simple as that. I mean, I'm writing a book about this now, and I want to get that message out there because as a traditionally trained medical doctor, I have an MD. That was never taught to me in medical school, that so many of the chronic health conditions that we suffer from autoimmune conditions like multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes, Sjogren's, autoimmune thyroid conditions. I had eczema. Some people have skin conditions like psoriasis. Autoimmune conditions are rampant. Chronic illnesses like obesity, diabetes, atherosclerosis. So many of these conditions that we suffer from chronically as humans are fixable if we just eat food for humans. And so this is wild to me that the Western medical system is not doing this. And I think this is exactly the intersection of the government and Maha in this problem, is that, hey, look, if you're making it okay, or you're not at least telling people, hey, if you eat food that is not for humans, which is this, you know, this myriad of ultra processed foods, you are going to be sick. It's as simple as that. I think we've been I think that in some ways the calories model has been quite misleading for people. We've thought, oh, as long as I just don't eat too many calories, I'm going to be okay. No, you cannot out exercise the toxins and the sort of artificial, confusing ingredients and compounds in an Oreo simply by doing the amount of exercise that burns off the calories in an Oreo. These things get stuck in our cells and our membranes. They affect our gut flora, which is the problem with sucrose. Processed sugar, it affects your gut flora in a negative way. So I want people to understand that, hey, you can, if you have the right as an American to go to Dunkin' Donuts and to eat a donut, right? But if you simply cannot just exercise to burn off those 200 calories, it doesn't work that way. All those toxins are negatively affecting your cells in your body in a way that has amplified effects long-term, or at least reverberating effects long-term.
We can't make this content without the support of our partners. Here's a message from one now. Do you want to support me? No, I don't. Yes, you do. Support me and support Rumble Premium. You won't only be supporting me, you'll get additional access to Mug Club, that's Crowder's gig, Timcast, that's Tim Paul's racket, and Glenn Greenwald's additional content. Join us on Rumble Premium. We make content every single week through Rumble because Rumble support free speech. When I was under attack from the British government and the British media, Rumble stood firm. Yes, of course, there's crazy people on Rumble. There's crazy people everywhere. There's a crazy person living under this hat. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have the right to speak freely together. By supporting Rumble Premium, you're supporting me and content creators like me. You get additional content, and what I will say even more, drink down deep on the delicious irony in this one, you get an ad-free experience. If you want an ad-free experience of Rumble, get Rumble Premium. In the meantime, stay free. We lost Paul for a moment there, but he's back, and I'm really glad of the opportunity to talk to you. Paul, I wanted to run you through some of my new products from Reborn and to get your absolute insight. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of variation in this, so as far, I just mean in general, the product, bovine colostrum. Is that a good idea?
Colostrum's great. There's actually good data with doses of 2 to 3 grams of colostrum per day in terms of gut health, immune health. Yeah, colostrum is the first milk from cows. And usually when they're collecting colostrum, I mean, they always leave enough for the calves. It's interesting that across species, the immunoglobulins in colostrum are beneficial for humans, probably for the gut and recovery in general. So yeah, colostrum's amazing. Like animals are incredibly valuable for humans, man. They make all kinds of nutrient-rich foods.
What about creatine powder? Is that good?
Creatine is great. There's been a lot of buzz about creatine recently. Doses from 5 to 20 grams a day have been studied to find benefit. 5 grams a day of creatine is beneficial probably for muscle strength, recovery, explosivity. 10 grams a day has been studied for osteoporosis in women. So I think about this for my mom, who's 75 years old. So if you have someone in your life who has bone density issues, you might go up a little bit, 8 or 10 grams of creatine a day. 20 grams of creatine is a mega dose that I wouldn't do every day, but there is some evidence that in the setting of sleep deprivation, 20 grams of creatine might push more creatine across the blood-brain barrier and help with cognition. Now, I mentioned creatine earlier in the podcast. What's cool about this is that creatine is something that only occurs in animal foods. But in order for you to get 5 grams of creatine a day, you'd have to eat probably 2 pounds of meat per day. Most of us are not eating 2 pounds of meat per day. So it's a valuable compound that is made by the body, but supplementation appears to be very beneficial for humans, and it's incredibly safe. There's really no evidence that it has any issues with the kidneys or anything. So
really,
creatine's amazing.
Because I was a bit worried about my kidneys. I went to have a test to see whether or not I should get supplemented testosterone, and it came back that I had a word that sounds a bit like creatine, but isn't creatine. I bet you know what that word is. Like creatinine. It was like, yeah, that. And I was like, oh no. And the doctor said, come off the creatine for a bit. And I'm really I want to get back on the creatine. I want to get back on it. Do you think it does affect the kidneys, can affect the kidneys?
No, it doesn't affect the kidneys at all. So I need to counsel your doctor on this. You can send in this part of the podcast.
If you want to watch the rest of this, you're going to have to click the link in the description. We're not doing it on YouTube no more. I don't trust them. Join us over there for the rest of this conversation with that frankly handsome and vascular man.
So one of the breakdown products of creatine is creatinine, but creatinine is not harmful to the body itself. Creatinine is a compound that we use to estimate your glomerular filtration rate. And so in kidney disease, people's creatinine will go up. Creatinine is a breakdown product from the muscles, from the creatinine in the muscles. But creatinine is just...
Jonathan, I've got a lot of things to ask you. Can I start?
Yeah, whenever you want.
Thanks for sending us those Thanks for sending us those books. Can you frame them for our audience so that the audience knows what I'm talking about when I say thanks for those books?
Yeah.
Snow White, Rapunzel. Oh, they're beautiful looking, by the way. Jack and the Beanstalk, isn't it, that you did?
Jack. Yeah.
That's right. So good. It's beautiful. I've got a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old and a 2-year-old.
That's perfect.
Yeah, we read it to my daughters. I read it to my daughters, and we took it in turns to read it. We read, we started with Rapunzel, we did Snow White. We haven't done Jack and the Beanstalk yet. Jack and the Beanstalk, I now tell the story. When we last spoke, Jonathan, I said to you, it seems to me there's less folk tales for men than women, and I sort of proselytized on why I thought that would be. And then you listed a few. And I said, but I don't understand Jack and the Beanstalk. And gosh, I've just come off a podcast, Jonathan, where I just publicly claimed on record, I don't think I ever talk to anyone and think that they're cleverer than me. I said, like, sometimes I talk to people and they know stuff I don't know. Of course, that happens every second of every day. But like the faculty, and I used Jordan as the example, like I'm not often listening and thinking I don't understand this unless they're talking about maths or astrophysics or something like that. And now God has put me in front of you because, when we spoke and I said, Jack and the Beanstalk, I don't understand that. And you said to me, he has to exchange the milk for the seed. And I was like, oh man, that's so cool. And since then, I've been telling when I have to mentor or advise or chat to young men, I tell them that story. And I don't give you any credit. I say that I've worked that out on my own.
It's the story itself. It's in the story. So if I found it there, it's because it's there, so you don't owe me anything.
Thank you. So what is your, with these, in particular, these brilliant and beautiful books, the illustrations are incredible. Your storytelling is fantastic. I was very surprised that you created one sort of meta-narrative where the 3 stories are interconnected. I thought that was interesting. I wonder what challenges that presented and why did you embark on this project as a whole? Give us a sort of a general overview.
Yeah, the biggest thing is that it felt like Disney was dropping the fairy tales. It didn't want them, actually. And so in the last few live versions they've been very cynical. And then the Snow White version they made was horrible because they don't know what to do. They don't like the fairy tales. They don't know how to handle them. And so I thought this is a sign for us that those of us that actually love these stories, that care for them and they care for our heritage, it's time to pick them up and to tell beautiful, celebratory, smart versions of the tales, not cynical, not trying to make them into some kind of political commentary, but rather just kind of tell them in a celebratory way. Yeah, that was the plan.
That's very good, and I think you've executed that plan. They're beautiful, and I'd recommend them to anyone. I love the copies that you've sent me. And normally when I interview people, I haven't looked at the thing that I'm meant to be promoting, like sometimes quite complex things, like films that are about COVID or, great tracts about geopolitics. And I have to sort of go, yeah, I get the idea. But this, I've actually read it and engaged with the material, and it's really, really beautiful, and I can't recommend it heartily enough. And there's a link in the description and a QR code if you want to get Jonathan's books. This sort of beautiful triptych, this trilogy of excellent retold fairy tales. Then you can get them here by clicking on that link. Hey, Jonathan.
And one of the things I want to say, I want to say one thing is that one of the problems we have too is that a lot of the people that are complaining about culture, that are complaining about the state of culture, that's where they stop. They just complain and then they don't do anything. And so I've been complaining for a few years about the state of culture, but there's something nagging in the back of my mind saying, well, Jonathan, if you don't like the state of culture, what are you going to do about it? And so that's why we started the Symbolic World Press and we started telling these fairy tales, but we're going to take it into a larger direction where we're going to try to retell all of the great tales of our heritage, from the Greek myths all the way to King Arthur. We're going to try to tell them in a beautiful, celebratory way that's also relevant to modern days. So
what a brilliant project. Also, all the IP is free, so it's viable financially.
Right, exactly.
That's fantastic. Now, a minute ago, in your first answer, you said that Disney is not retelling folk tales well. I think I know why that is, but will you tell me why that is?
Well, I think one of the things that happened, of course, in Disney is that it got taken over by, I guess, what you could call the woke mind virus. It started with a kind of feminism trope where they didn't like the idea of the princess that meets her prince. They wanted to liberate her. It started with, I think, with Rapunzel, actually, where this whole story is about her own self development, and the guy is just a detail in the story. And then it just kept getting worse and worse as they moved down the progressive line to a point where the images in the fairy tales didn't make sense to what they wanted to make anymore. So by the time they got to Snow White, that's why it took like, I think, 3-4 years to make Snow White, is because the first version they made was so political. And they realized that no one is going to want this because Disney is, that story, particular Snow White, it was the first full-length animation. It was a massive moment in culture when Disney made that movie, and they were basically dragging it through the mud by making it into a kind of postmodern commentary. And so I think that's what it is. And now the problem they have is that they realize that they're in trouble. Nobody wants to see their movies anymore. Nobody cares. But it's hard to get rid of people once the company itself is made of people that think in a certain way. I don't know. I don't think they can recover from this.
No, nor do I. Yeah, they've, in a sense, they've been stymied by their own peculiar and sort of spiraling agenda there. I was just thinking, though, how do we align these peculiar parcels, Jonathan, like that, initially Disney takes a cultural artifact like a Grimm or a Hans Christian Andersen fairy story that's redolent with relevant imagery and ideas precisely because it's somehow presumably accessing deep archetypal truths. Then Disney in its earlier incarnation is somehow able to, in a sense, amplify or at least reiterate those principles through the medium of animation. 100 years later, Disney is not even able to stay true. Isn't it amazing how fast our culture moves? It isn't even able to stay true to its own interpretation of source material. Like, I noticed it a bit. I watched like the live action Pinocchio, and it seemed like they weren't comfortable with lying or something like that, or consequence. I was like, this is fucking pointless. What are they even talking about now at this point? And it's a shame because, there's a darkness in human beings, and therefore there's a darkness in fairy stories and folk stories, because there's a darkness that has to be addressed. And if you sort of deny that darkness, I wonder what happens to a culture. But now this is my set of questions, having made that point. See something like Snow White, right? That's a folk cultural object, should we call it? And likely pagan. It's a sort of a pagan object. How do we as Christians, Jonathan, align pagan cultural artifacts with Christian interpretations in a culture that's, in a sense, a neo-modern progressive paganism? And one would think that the original paganism of some of the source material, taking paganism to mean the worship of entities and essences found within nature, both inverted commas, external and internal. How do we as Christians, and how did you as a Christian, given you've been doing it, how did you manage that? How do you make sure that Christ and the truth of Christ is present in these pagan artifacts, as well as tackling the political sort of vicissitudes of political thought?
Yeah. Well, there are a few things to your question. I would say the first thing is that I don't think it's true. I think that the idea that these are pagan stories, I think, is something that was made up by 19th century anti-Christian thinkers that tried to do that for everything. They told us that Christmas is pagan, Easter is pagan, pretty much everything that's Christian is pagan. I think it's just bullshit. I think that these stories, although they clearly take sources in pre-Christian stories, like they're a continuation of pre-Christian stories. But by the time that they're transcribed, they have a very, very deep Christian structure, right? They've been transformed, you could say, from these ancient Greek myths, and they've been in some ways fiddled with, they've been retold, they've been remembered in a manner that in fact has a deep Christian root to it. And so when I told Snow White, for example, I tried to pull the threads of the story that would make you see that this is a Christian story. I mean, the story of Snow White is a story about resurrection. It's a story, it's a song of songs. It's about a bride that finds her lover. If you watch the early Disney version, you can see that when the prince kisses her and wakes her up, he actually takes her to heaven. Like he takes her to a castle in the sky. And so Disney knew very well that this was a resurrection story, that it was a very deep Christian story. But if I can back up a little bit and say, how is it that Christians deal with these? Early Christians and the kind of late classical Christians, they had no problems with the Greek myths, in the sense that St. Basil said that you had to read the Iliad and the Odyssey before you read the Bible, because you had to be a cultured person to be able to have a kind of story track in your mind. You had to have these stories kind of ingrained into your thinking, so that when you read the Bible, you could understand the stories there. It's the same with the supposedly northern myths. Everybody talks about Thor and Odin and how these pagan myths, but you know who wrote those stories down? It was Christians. Christians are the ones who actually wrote down the Greek myths. They were written when when the people in Iceland converted to Christianity. And so there's a very deep misunderstanding about this in the Christian stories. C.S. Lewis talked about how, in fact, Christ is the true myth. And so in all the pagan stories, there's a hint, there's like a little glimmer, there's something of Christ in those stories. And it's our job in some ways to be able to make that little something shine, and to help point it in a direction that is positive. So that's what I think about that.
Thanks. Because I suppose to truly be Christian, you accept his atemporal and aspatial nature, meaning that even pre-incarnate, his presence will be felt in story and myth and culture universally. I mean, I wonder sometimes, as someone that's read a little of the Mahabharata and some of the Vedas, that when encountering aspects of, say, well, specifically the aspect of Krishna is very Christ-like, a very Christ-like deity. I mean, it sounds like Christ, and there's a child Krishna, and he's kind of a playful kid, and I don't know that it has the sort of key and necessary tropes, but I'm not making the claim that it's absolute. But are you in a sense, and did C.S. Lewis to some degree do this too, collapsing the separate category of paganism, because to accept it as a separate category would be to deny the universal nature and ubiquitous presence of Christ?
I think that's the right way to see it. But I mean, we can be cautious. So you can imagine in the early Christian fathers, there's two strains. Is Justin Martyr and Tertullian as the kind of two extremes. So you have Tertullian saying, what does Jerusalem have to do with Athens? All of this pagan stuff, we have to get rid of it. We have to kind of cut it out. And then you have people like Justin Martyr, who said all truth is God's truth. All place where you find the truth of the Logos in the past is God's. And he said that the ancient philosophers were Christians before Christ. And this is in the second, like early 3rd century. Okay. So this is very, very early. So I think that that's the way to think about it, is that yes, sometimes there's some things in the pagan stories, obviously, that we can't stomach and that we kind of have to weed out. But the things that point to that which is true, sometimes even in the negative, even sometimes there are things that are kind of a counterpoint that you can understand as an image of evil or an image of excess, that those things can be, I think that those things can definitely not only be preserved, but they can be part of the story. We just finished reading Dante's Divine Comedy, which is in some ways the great synthesis of medieval thinking, of the great synthesis of medieval Christianity. And the pagan references are everywhere in Dante's Divine Comedy. In all the way up to heaven, he will reference these kind of pagan images as a deep cultural baggage that he can use to talk about the Christian mystery that he's encountering. And so I don't see a problem with that at all.
You almost describe them as notes in the symphony, and melodies that to do without would create a kind of deprivation. So if there is these kind of symbolic truths that somehow, if not lose their luster, become less articulate when transferred into language. Do you believe, helping me with my new journey into scripture, Jonathan, that there are points where in, like, say, at the moment I've been spending some time in like Daniel and Ezekiel, and I'm reading Revelation, and we are clearly in a terrain where building the sort of narrow bandwidth of language, whether you're talking about, and obviously I only speak English, let me declare that right up front, whether it was in Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic or King James Version or New International Version, the primary translation you're dealing with is from the mind of God to the mind of man. So when I'm encountering whether it's burning bushes or apples or lampstands or the potter and the clay, and actually, Jonathan, I'm having an empirical experience of this. I was meditating under instruction on the light, on the coming of the light, that I am the coming of the light, and that we are not separate. We are not separate from the light. And somewhere in the midst of this experience, the Isaiah, I think it's in Isaiah, but I think it's in Psalms also somewhere, and I think Paul references it, of the clay, I feel like I felt the prima materia of me that is not language, that is expressed in language, but not language, being changed and molded. I feel like I felt it, Jonathan. So to read, whether it's folk tales or the Iliad or the Odyssey or Norse myth or whatever, are we saying that the point of it is to allow it to lure you into a pre-verbal state?
Okay, there's a lot in what you said there. You could say for sure there is this sense, definitely, that all that which is communicated, that is all the revelations, and then everything that's downstream from the revelation, is pointing to something which is beyond. And so if you think of the hierarchy of the tabernacle, you get a sense of that, which is in the deep center, right? In the center of centers, there is a place that is inaccessible to anyone except for one person, and that person, is in great danger going there if they're not completely pure from all their sins. And so this is where the glory of God appears, and the glory of God is beyond, like you said, all of expression, all of word, all of language, and then it unfolds within the world through images, and then through structures, and then through laws, and et cetera, et cetera. And so in Orthodox theology, we have this idea of what we call apophatic theology and cataphatic theology, and therefore this idea that God is always beyond, like what you're saying, that there is the true reality of God is beyond all expression, all word, even being itself. God is beyond that. And then we have what we call cataphatic theology, is also understanding that all things are in some ways expressions of God. All things that are good are expressions of God, because he is the source of all things. And therefore we have to always find a balance between those two. If we're not careful and we focus too much on the apophatic sense, we become Gnostic. We start to have, we believe that the world is Maya. We believe that the world is illusion. We believe that all the things in the world are evil in themselves. And that is definitely, that's an error, at least from a Christian point of view, because God is a God of love. But if we focus too much on the external parts, then we become idolaters. We start to confuse the expressions for that which is being expressed. And so there's always a kind of sway between those two. There's a play between both understanding how God is beyond all things and that God is present in all things, and being careful of not going into only one direction.
Is that the sort of transcendent and immanent argument in some way recounted? Is that comparable or similar?
And that those two are not opposed, and that's important. Like the idea that transcendence and immanence are not opposed, but that in fact one is the cause of the other. It's because God is transcendent that he is fully immanent in all things, because he is the source and the origin and the kind of transcendent source of all that exists.
Yes. there's something in the idea that at some point a vibration collapses into matter through pattern and symbol. It's very difficult, isn't it, to try to physically track what we're talking about when we say that vibrations appear to create mandala and symbol, and at some point these detectable mandala and symbol undergird more discernible and detectable reality, and at some point must transform, become flesh, is a very difficult thing to understand. And what I want to sort of say as well, as I touch the hem of esotericism as best as I can, at least, is that while I'm in all this, Jonathan, it's I feel myself like it's close to, not, I don't want to say madness, but a kind of how do we keep our feet on the ground? How do we remain rooted? How do we remain earthed? How do you earth yourself? How do you do it?
Well, I mean, you have to go to church. That's how you do it, in the sense that you have to be part of a body, and you also have to acknowledge some kind of authority. And of course we understand that these relationships, like, let's say, the body, the participation, the going to church, the liturgy, and also the structure of authority is not everything. It can become corrupt, it can become but it's necessary in some ways to keep you grounded and to avoid what the church fathers or the ascetic fathers call preles, which is spiritual delusion, because that's the problem. If you're alone and you're just kind of having these spiritual experiences and you have nothing against which to test it, you have no one to help you discern and to help you know how to live it. You have nobody that you're knocking your elbows against, that have that are annoying you at church, and that are being all these things that happen in the community. Those things are there to help you, ground you, so that you don't start to have spiritual delusions.
Yeah, you don't go crazy. Yeah, that happens to me. Okay, so there's a few things. Yeah, but I wonder, I wonder what it was like for Elijah. I wonder what it was like. Now, are we then to assume that, that actually, well, let me try and sketch out. You know me well enough to know there's not going to be any sort of actual questions, just sort of a great deluge of sound that I want you to make a tune from. And here's the next set of sound. You're looking at Jung's Red Book and seeing those peculiar geometric shapes, and I know that he says it's, Siegfried and stuff, but what's all that early egg geometry and all them reptile drawings in there? What is all that? And this weird concerto of matter that seems like someone trying to track and trace vibration becoming form and the interstitial material between the vibration and form. How does that connect to something that seems so boldly literal, like Elijah seeing and hearing and actually being able to take it to the test and burn up altars and stuff like that? Do you feel, Jonathan, that in this age it's not going to be enough to be getting some sort of geometric clandestine insight in the way that Jung did? Aren't we going to need, like Elijah, to start blowing shit up?
I mean, I think that we definitely need holy people. That's for sure, and we need holy people, and a lot of holy people they can become very harsh. There's a you might not know about him, but there's a monk, an archimandrite who passed away recently, Elder Ephraim. And he started, dozens of monasteries all across North America. Came from Mount Athos, and his monasteries are known for being quite harsh. And a lot of people kind of fear his monasteries because they're quite demanding of the monks there. And in some ways, he's establishing that harshness as a root, a kind of, living in the desert and living out, the more difficult aspect of Christianity. But then those monasteries have been quite fruitful. We have one that's close to my house, maybe about 45 minutes, and it's actually a wonderful place where you can feel the fruits in the community. You can feel the transformative effect of that holiness on the people. And so I do think that we need kind of Elijah type characters We need Elijah type figures. But you have to remember that Elijah, although it feels to us like he's alone in the story, it says that he saved the prophets, that he hid them in a cave, and he wasn't alone. He was actually in a kind of, we don't know the structure exactly, but the structure of prophetic brothers that probably lived somewhat like monks at the time. And so I think that we still have that. I met the abbot of a monastery in Mount Athos when just a few years ago, and when I saw him, he was glowing. I mean, he wasn't like. I mean, it's hard to explain because obviously he wasn't glowing like if you had taken some kind of measuring tool and you had seen if there was like. But there's no other word I can use besides that he was glowing, because his presence was so arresting, and his eyes were so piercing, that it reduced everyone in the room to absolute silence. And I was there with like 2 billionaires and Jordan Peterson and all these like very, very high level people, and everyone was reduced to absolute silence, and everybody became teary eyed. And if it's weird, because if you had like a transcription of what was said, what the monk said, you would say, well, this is just, it's just saying what Jesus said. He's not saying anything that sounds so intellectual and extremely, but it was really just his presence and him saying the words of Christ and saying simple words of encouragement with so much presence that made you feel like, yeah, you were standing in front of someone like Elijah,
Do you want to support me? No, I don't. Yes, you do. Support me and support Rumble Premium. You won't only be supporting me, you'll get additional access to Mug Club, that's Crowder's gig, Timcast, that's Tim Paul's racket, and Glenn Greenwald's additional content. Join us on Rumble Premium. We make content every single week through Rumble because Rumble support free speech. When I was under attack from the British government and the British media, Rumble stood firm. Yes, of course, there's crazy people on Rumble. There's crazy people everywhere. There's a crazy person living under this hat. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have the right to speak freely together. By supporting Rumble Premium, you're supporting me and content creators like me. You get additional content, and what I will say even more, drink down deep on the delicious irony in this one, you get an ad-free experience. If you want an ad-free experience of Rumble, get Rumble Premium. In the meantime, stay free. Presence is the word, I suppose, that presumably, I suppose in that instance, one might try to understand that he must have undertaken so many practices and disciplines that by the time you had that encounter, there's more Christ than, less of the man and more of the Lord. And okay, I'm trying to think of my own encounters with that. Say when I think of someone like Amma, the hugging saint, when I met her, very earthly, very warm. She has like a 10,000 person ashram, and I can tell she's, she, as best as I could tell, she's living like a saint. She's not going around the back and having sex or something. There's not some secondary motive. Like, and another a person, a Krishna consciousness man I met, Radhanath Swami, who I became friends with actually and spent times with. The first time I encountered him, Jonathan, I sort of got very elevated and innovated. I was young and I was only just off drugs, and I remember I goes, oh, so what, this isn't the final level of reality, it's just like a video game and there are other levels of reality. And I started talking real quick and stuff, and he just laughed and held my face, and I sort of, then I nearly cried and I felt embarrassed, like as if I was attracted to someone like I would be sexually. It wasn't sexual, but it was a level of attraction, and then, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, when I met him, because he was such a sort of sanctioned figure of holiness, I was trying to think, right, Russell, objectively, come on, is this holy what you're encountering, or is this because you've been told in advance it's the Dalai Lama? And man, I tell you, Jonathan, I was so fascinated by the amount of paraphernalia, the followers, a literal carpet being laid down, like shit like that, So it's interesting because almost part of the deal with Christianity is one has to sort of enter into what one might regard as a sect, like, even Eastern Orthodoxy for its scale, and then sort of monasteries within that, and then an individual, like you said, with the tabernacle